Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Tuesday, August 11th, 2026 call of the CARC Workforce Development Interest Group. Today, we're joined by Stephen Deems and Daphne McCants, both from Internet 2, who will be sharing with us some of what was covered at RCD Nexus Day this year, a few weeks ago, about building on-ramps into the RCD profession and about opportunities to continue participating in that, to volunteer and more. Before we get started with them, I do want to share one thing with all of you. So some of you have seen this slide already. This is the slide that we've been working on for why volunteer to do something with CARC. And we're trying to present this at the beginning of a number of meetings. It's particularly relevant today because one of the things Daphne and Stephen will talk about is volunteer opportunities, in addition to helping provide an update for anyone not at Nexus Day who just wants to learn about what was discussed. But there's a lot of good reasons to do some volunteer work for CARC, whether it's discussed here or something else. It can be beneficial both to you and to your institution for all of these reasons. So check this out. It's also up on the CARC website. Think about the professional development opportunity for yourself and how resources you develop can help your institution to accomplish RCD work more effectively and efficiently. And with that, I want to say welcome to Daphne and Stephen and ask you to get started.
Thank you, Michael. Let me share some slides here. All right, can you guys see those?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I think everybody here knows me, but if not, I'm Daphne McCants. I have several different hats I wear for CARC, including being the secretary of the transitional board and co-chair of the engagement group. And I just kind of lead our communications in general. And I co-hosted this workshop with Stephen Deems. Stephen, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah, hey everyone, I'm Stephen Deems at Internet 2 as well. Just joined about 6 or 7 months ago. So new to Internet 2, but been aware of CARC, been working in CARC for several years now. But thanks for having us today, and thanks to a lot of the people on this call who helped make this year's RCD Nexus Day possible and make it quite a success. So happy to talk to you all about that today.
Yeah, I believe most of you were in there, not all of you. So apologies to those of you who were actually at the workshop. There's going to be a few things that we're going to go over that are going to be a little bit redundant from the workshop. But then at the end, I think Michael was interested in maybe continuing some of the discussion. This is just really quickly, the folks down here at the bottom, it wasn't just Stephen and me. This was a big group effort by all of the folks that are listed here, including some of the others that are on this call, Stephen, Winona, and several others, Betsy, who's not here, Dana, Levi Dolan, and Ashley Stauffer, and Bob Freeman. So a quick shout out to all of them first. My slides are not advancing. There we go. So real quickly, Stephen and I are gonna share just sort of what inspired us to have this workshop. And I'm gonna tell just a quick story. So I was talking with my son, who's a college student, an undergraduate college student, and some of his friends about a year ago, a little over a year ago now. And one of his friends who is studying, he's a good student and studying at a university, intends to go into, do his PhD in chemistry. And I was just telling him a little bit about RCD, what RCD careers are. And he had never heard of these types of careers and didn't even realize that this was a thing that was possible. And when I told him about it, he absolutely lit up. He got very excited and really wanted to know more and wanted to know how he could sort of get involved, like move into a career like this. And so I gave him the advice that he should sign up for the PERC student program. And he did. He applied for the PERC student program and he didn't get in. So he came back and, asked me the question, So do you have any advice on what I do now? I didn't get in. Um, and um, I really was a little bit at a loss as to what to tell him to do next. And so, there are a few things I could recommend to him, but there wasn't really one thing to say. And this was happening right around the time that we were trying to decide what we were going to do with this year's RCD Nexus Day. And so that's sort of one part of how this workshop got conceived. And then Stephen also has a personal story that sort of plays into why we felt this was a good workshop to do.
Yeah, I was really happy when Daphne reached out because I got into this field really by happenstance. My mother sat next to a staff member at Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center on an airplane while I was at the University of Pittsburgh, passed me a business card. I had no idea what a supercomputer was, let alone knew that there are people that work with researchers to help them utilize computational and data resources for their research. So coming from a background in business, it was certainly a shift for me. But that was just over 15 years ago, and I've been here ever since. And I do still struggle to not only describe the field, but talk to folks about how to get into it if they're interested. So again, I'm very happy to be a part of this.
And before the workshop, we asked our attendees to do some pre-work and also did some surveys. We just asked people how they got into the field, and literally no one in the pre-work indicated that they had had a plan to get into RCD. Everyone said that they just sort of stumbled into the work or got lost along the way and ended up here somehow. And then we asked the same question at the workshop, and we weren't sure anyone would raise their hand, but surprisingly, two people did raise their hand in an audience of 66 and said that they intended to become RCD professionals. One was a career changer who had heard about the profession through she was going back to school and one of her professors clued her in. And then the other one was a former PERC student program attendee. So those were it out of 66 folks. Sort of the rationale we had for the workshop was that we believed that the RCD workforce demand is still outpacing supply. Our pre-work surveys supported that. Some of the information that Ashley Stoffer and the professionalization group did on the recent workforce survey also supports that position. But yet there's no single authoritative source or resource to help support people on entering the field. So our goal for the workshop was to create the framework for a community-owned field guide that would become a living, evolving document. So we're not intending to just create this and have it be a static document forever. We view this as something that's going to need to hopefully will live on the CARC website, and we will revisit it periodically to update it and keep it refreshed. So our goals were to define the audiences, agree on the structure, and develop the section content outlines collaboratively, and to leave with a working outline. I want to just quickly go through what some of the pre-workshop survey information said, because I think that it does a good job of explaining what our goals were going in. So the hiring managers that we surveyed said that one of the biggest problems were that applicants misunderstand what the RCD profession is. They view it as just being sort of generic IT support or strictly HPC support. And they said that they don't realize that the job is not a job providing structured solutions, but rather doing sort of open-ended facilitation work. And you don't necessarily know what you're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis, and you're going to be facing new problems all the time. They also said that soft skills are more important than specific technical skills, and they mentioned specifically qualities like curiosity, communication, and adaptability. And then they said, of course, baseline technical fluency is still important, but it's not really the differentiator when they're hiring. And then they also said that there's not really any good shared channel or standard in the field for posting open positions. Students and early career folks said that sort of supported what the hiring folks said, and said that it's hard for them to understand how RCD work differs from enterprise and IT jobs, and that they didn't realize at first that the profession involves helping others do research and not doing research yourself. So it really did support what the hiring manager said, was echoed in what the student and early career folks said, that yes, we are confused by this. They also said that it was difficult to understand how different roles in RCD fit together, and they don't know which skills they need to prioritize when they're trying to build their skill set. They don't have any clear sense of a career ladder, or how they would, when they get into this field, sort of what is their goal, what are they working toward, and what are the different possibilities for them to move up if they would like to do that. And they said what would help most is something like a clear roadmap into the career, also hearing career journeys from working professionals, and having good opportunities for building mentor connections. We asked everyone what they thought should be in the guide. The number one answer was role descriptions, how they interconnect, and what the qualifications are for each professional role, followed closely by a skills matrix mapping skills to specific roles. So those two are sort of intertwined. Folks also suggested that we should talk about the career ladder, explaining how a typical RCD career might progress, and map the skills that folks might need to progress in each rung. People mentioned the CARC facings model as the clearest existing framework for explaining RCD roles. And they suggested including things like a list of training, virtual residency opportunities, and then also advice on how to gain access to hands-on practice environments and mentorship opportunities.
All right. Thanks, Daphne. So in terms of how did the workshop actually go, this was a full day workshop during RCD Nexus Day, the day before the PERC conference kicked off. And we had 66 folks who spent the day with us. Wanted to shout them out here. So thank you for time that you took to make this resource with us or build the structure. How we actually structured the workshop was that the morning session really framed the problem and explored some of that data that Daphne mentioned. So I want to shout out Ashley Stauffer, Levi Dolan, who provided the RCD workforce survey that had over 800 respondents, as well as Tim Middlecoop from Internet 2, who gave an overview of his survey of 100 RCD postings in the community. And after we saw some of the data, Winona, Betsy, and Michael facilitated a discussion around who are the audiences that are most relevant for this guide? Who should we be thinking about as we're going through our day, through our afternoon? And really the core of the afternoon was spent on identifying what sections must be in the guide and then drafting some of the high-level bullets and contents for those sections. Again, we emphasize that we are crafting the outline and that we would actually generate the guide afterwards. Next slide, please. So this was my illustration for the group that is like, we are not writing the whole guide here. We just need the essential sections and the content outlined. Next, please, and thank you. So after we saw the data, we had discussions. Really, we wanted to focus on ranking. Identifying and ranking what sections need to be in there. You'll see that in a bit. Groups reported back. And after lunch, we had breakouts around assigning sections and drafting specific bits for each of those. After a group had drafted one, we essentially rotated groups, had sort of like a peer review of other folks' work, identifying what they agreed with, what may have been missing, or what could benefit from being reframed. At the end of the workshop, we had a full synthesis of all of it. And really, we're here today to kind of do a review of what happened, but also look for some additional volunteers and also highlight some of the things that came out of the workshop that weren't necessarily in scope for this guide, but could be potential future work. The other thing I want to highlight before I go on as well is we urge the audience to link to references and link to tools that already exist that we can populate in this guide rather than recreating any work. So that'll be a part of the finished product as well. Next slide, please, and thank you, Daphne. So in terms of who is the guide for, this is what the group came up with, is that we should start young. We should look into K through 12 to high school students on up through undergrads, graduate students, recent graduates, postdocs, mid-career professionals, especially those mid-career professionals who may be looking for a career change. Academic leadership could be across departments, across different schools, as well as, and I kind of personally champion this one, is saying that like I would love to have more concise and more understandable language for my own family and friends for Thanksgiving dinner table when they ask, what is it that you do again and how did you get into this? So that's really where the group set on audiences. Next slide, please. So in terms of what were the sections that the group thought needed to be in this guide? Well, first was the definition. What is RCD work and what does that entail and what are the jobs in there? Why is RCD work essential? Like, why does the work matter? If we were going to go out and get tough, instead of talking to our family, talking to someone maybe in government, why this work is essential. What types of skills and competencies are required here? And I believe on the next slide, I'll have a little bit more on that. What types of education pathways and credentials could folks look into and explore if they're interested in getting into this? As well as networking opportunities, professional opportunities to build those skills, to build those connections and learn more about the space. For folks that are potentially going to switch careers, or maybe they're in a major or down a path that doesn't necessarily directly map to RCD, how can we take those skill sets and those experiences and align them with a lot of the qualities that we see in folks in the RCD space? As well as tips and tools on how to network, how to go about the hiring process, looking at jobs, and trying to discern whether it's an appropriate fit for them as well. And I put artificial intelligence here because at the end of the session, we realized that the group hadn't really called out AI as a specific section, but noted that it does touch across all of these, and it touches nearly every occupation now. So that one will be hanging there until we figure out how to weave that into the guide. Next, Daphne, please, and thank you. So again, tying back to that last slide, what are some of the themes that we're already seeing emerging from the text that was drafted by the groups? Or we were pretty much almost in unanimous agreement on that technical skills really aren't the barrier. It's the soft skills, it's the people skills that really is the differentiator here, and an emphasis that building those types of skills are essential for this type of work. And that it's better to have a high level view of the space rather than in-depth skill sets in specific areas. Now, of course, there are times where that is needed. It's no one's going to argue that, but having a high level view of the space is essential. Again, what we emphasized in this exercise was let's link to the resources that are out there. Let's avoid rebuilding anything here. A lot of what came out of the discussion, as well as Tim's data analysis, was that potentially the same job could be labeled 5, 6 different ways. So trying to figure out ways that this guide could break that down to help identify career paths would be great. And lastly, which we had a little bit of time during the session to talk about, is just because we create and we publish and we make this guide available doesn't mean that it'll be found by the people who who we're thinking about when we're crafting it or that'll be used. Communicating and disseminating this guide is going to be essential, and it's going to be a separate stream of work. And so, even if folks aren't necessarily interested in helping to write and review the guide, we would greatly appreciate some help with actually going through it with stakeholders and as well as disseminating it through various channels. Next slide, please, and thank you. So in terms of what's next, so we're currently synthesizing the artifacts from the workshop. We did take a little breather last week after PERC, so we're picking that up right now with this call and did some early analysis for these slides. And around late October, we're going to circulate the draft with the CART community, and we're hoping to finalize and kind of close off the draft in September and shoot for publication in October. So as I just mentioned, we certainly want folks to help with the document itself. We'd love it if there were folks that are able to test it with students or test it with peers and in their institutions and their communities, and certainly help with the communications and dissemination plan. Next slide, please, and thank you. And I'll pass it off to Daphne, and I think we do have a link to share for folks that are interested in volunteer, so we can make sure that we catch that at the end if it's not already in chat.
Yeah, I think I'll have to drop it. I'll drop it in the chat in just a moment.
All right, awesome.
So as Stephen mentioned, we did have, as in any workshop like this where you're developing something, a takeaway, other ideas get sparked during the day that are certainly worth capturing and considering for future work. And we just wanted to sort of share this one with this group in particular, since this is the focus of your interest group, and just let you guys know what some of the other ideas were that came out of this workshop so that maybe you guys could chew on them as well. So the first one was that folks suggested doing a day in the lifestyle interviews of RCD professionals from various facings and experience levels. And I'm excited to announce that this one's actually already getting started. Some of you have seen the new Q&As that have been coming out, the non-R1 RCD center stories, and those are being conducted and written by a writer that's working on our team, Stephanie Heidemann. And I am working now to give Stephanie a new assignment to start creating some of these a day in the life of interviews that folks said would be really useful companion to the guide that we're creating. So I'm going to have her start working on those. And then some of the other ideas that people came out with said that it would be good to have an interactive site where the reader can select an audience and receive a tailored path for how they can move through this career, get started in this career. And then they talked about materials specifically designed for high school science teachers and guidance counselors to help educate students on these things. And I think the guide itself could be something that we point them to, but we could maybe tailor some communications for them. So I think that piece might fall somewhat within the scope of this project. Then they talked about a standard channel and convention for posting RCD positions. Now, this one was solidly outside the scope of what we were trying to do, but I think it's definitely something that the community might consider discussing. And then awareness about events on campuses across the country, so a more comprehensive events listing, and also training in research project management. People were saying that it's a specific type of skill that people need, and there's not really a good offering that is tailored to doing project management specifically in the research space. So that was the potential future work that we talked about.
Yeah, and just a little more on that last one for folks that have either looked into or taken the project management professional training. It's very different from the type of projects, in sciences, in research, where it is focused a lot on industry, almost like construction type jobs. So more um, there was definitely an interest in more training around the breadth and the diversity of projects that are in this space and the skill sets that be required there. Sorry to interrupt, Daphne.
No, it's fine. And then this was the last slide in our actual presentation here. So you can ignore our invitation to go to a networking reception. That is not happening. That's already over. But I did want to share the QR code and the tiny URL in case you wanted to look at the full slide deck from our workshop, if any of that interested you, because there's some good things in there. Ashley Stoffer gave a fantastic presentation about the workforce development or the workforce survey. And some of her slides are in there. And I think if you missed them, they would be a great thing to go back and look at. It was a really great presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and then I will drop the link in our chat to the sign up sheet. If there's any of you that have not signed up to help who would like to sign up to help, we would be thrilled to have you on board.
Yeah, thanks, Daphne and Stephen, for that summary of what happened at Nexus Day. I think that it was helpful for me, even having been there, to see it all put together. And for those who weren't there or who were down the hall in the other room, so I see a couple of those participants to see what we were up to. So yeah, it's a great opportunity to volunteer. And you've got a couple different volunteer opportunities also for people who want to be involved in different aspects or want to be involved at different levels of commitment. So that's really nice to see. And most of you saw at the beginning a slide about how volunteering can be good for your professional development. So yeah, I think the rest of the time we were hoping to, hope maybe some of you want to volunteer or ask about volunteering, but also just to collect feedback, any thoughts you might have about the summary and ideas that Daphne and Stephen have shared with us. What would be most helpful uh, or most practical that you think would be good to keep in mind while this is being worked on?
I think we knocked it out of the park, Daphne.
Yeah, I think you thought of everything we can all think of already.
If
I did
there's
put the
if there's
volunteer.
anything that RCD professionals need, it's more opportunities to contribute and to stretch themselves even thinner. So we get it. We understand what we signed up for, but really,
No,
like selfishly gonna say, we started the day with 66 people, and I don't think anybody left throughout the day. And seeing that folks arrived a day early for already a week that's pretty long and intensive to be with us and to help craft this was really awesome. So again, especially to y'all who were there and folks that may see the recording, like thank you all for a great day and for really putting tremendous effort into this.
yeah, and thanks again to the two of you for taking charge of making it all happen. Yeah, so it looks like we've got a good number of volunteers already, which is great to see. A lot of people on the list are also here today. A lot of people here have already signed up, but does anyone have any other feedback? Either you were there and something that sort of percolated through your mind later on, or you weren't there and you heard the summary and prompted some questions. Anything you'd like to share? And we can do an unrecorded Q&A or discussion also, if anyone's holding out for that. I think let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.